God, and thank you. I couldn't see who said that. Is that Erica?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Well, thank you. So here's a map of mostly Asia Minor, and you can see the seven churches that are written about in the revelation of Jesus Christ. And John, most scholars say at this time was living in Ephesus. Now I'll cover that again in a minute. And prayer requests. We decided a few weeks ago that we would start off with prayer requests, and I don't know. Erica, is Michael on with us? I'm not looking at that particular screen.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. All right. So you can get these if you don't mind. Any
Can
prayer requests?
I jump in? Hey, Skip,
Yeah.
we've got an urgent one going on. I'd like to go ahead and toss it out. Andy's youngest son went missing Sunday. They found his truck up in the mountains out in Montana. They're going to be doing a search today. Please pray for the situation because it doesn't look very good.
And I'm sorry, whose son?
My husband's youngest. He's about, I'm thinking about a 38-year-old. And we don't really have a lot of details as to what might have instigated a problem. But he went missing, and yeah, his first name is Asa.
Okay. Well, I hate to hear that. That's got to be scary. I mean, it really to have someone missing in your family, especially in a mountainous area. I assume that's what this is.
Yeah, mountainous and snowy. Thanks for letting me share it.
Oh, well, yeah, sure. Okay. Other prayer. I know Nina. I don't know if Nina's on here. Nina's been having problems with her lungs again. I know pneumonia and some things. Is she on here, or Wade, or Sue? Can one of you all tell us how Nina's?
I don't see their names on here at all.
Okay. I thought I saw.
Oh wait, I do see Nina's. I lied. Nina's just popped up.
Okay, Nina, how are you doing? All right, let's go on. We'll come back to Nina. Any other prayer requests? Keep praying for Ken. I mean, not Ken, but Mark, and his recovery of the knee surgery that he had a few weeks ago. How about COVID? Anybody still battling with that? Okay.
I've got an update on Rowan.
Oh yeah, Rowan. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my grandson who had the multi-system problem from follow-on from COVID. He's doing well. He finished steroids. This is a message from his mother. Finished taking some steroids yesterday. And he's going to have a cardiac monitor for all the time for the next month. So they're monitoring his heartbeat. There's been very few episodes and he's getting stronger. So things are positive. It's just they don't know what the long-term situation is. But, obviously they're very, very appreciative of people's prayers all over the U.S. So.
Okay, well, that's good news, or better news. It'll be good news when they come back and say he's just fine.
You're right.
All right. Anybody else? Okay. If everybody will bow your heads, I'll ask a little prayer here. Our Heavenly Father, we come before you on behalf of these people that, these folks that we've talked about that have health problems or have had health problems. I know Ken had already mentioned about his wife and her wheat allergy, and Rowan, and I know Nina has been having problems with her lungs, and we just ask that you would bless these people and send your healing spirit to them. And Father, we know that there are many, many, many other people who are ill, who have terrible diseases that they have. They need comfort. Their families need comfort. And we know that you are the great healer. But we also know that you won't put a stop to all of this until after your son returns to take over this earth, to heal the mess that we humans have made of your creation, the foods that we've eaten, the habits that we've had over the years that have caused different types of sicknesses. And so, Father, we just ask that you would be with all of your people and people all over the world that need your help and need your healing. We ask this in your Son, our Savior and King, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right. Today's Bible study is, I think, going to be a little bit different than my.
When you wake up, when I started talking?
No, a little before that. I was awake from 1:30 to 4.
Sorry about that. Clay hit. I don't think he realized his mic was on. Skip, your mic is off.
Wow. I was saying that today's Bible study is going to be a little bit different. And what I meant was that I'm just going to stay on mute the whole time and not let.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I yeah, we have to use our telepathy to understand what you're thinking.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Good luck. You know, Diane says that the most horrible fear she's ever had is that she might at some point be in my brain for 2 or 3 minutes. And she says that.
There's a song that goes, "You say it best when you say nothing at all," but I think this isn't that situation. But when you have graphics, I'm only on the phone today, so feel free to describe what you're seeing since I can't see it.
Well, I do have a blank screen right now, so you're seeing what you're supposed to see. Oh, you're not. You're on the phone. Well, nobody else is seeing anything either. So anyway, okay. 3rd John is John's 4th written message. I know that sounds kind of funny, I guess. According to many sources, John left Jerusalem shortly before its destruction. I think we've talked about this before, and he traveled to Ephesus. And some say, or many say, that he took Jesus' mother Mary with him, and that they lived in Ephesus. You know, Jesus had asked him to care for her. He wrote the Gospel of John first. He wrote it in the 70s, the scholars say. Then he wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John in the 80s. And most scholars believe he wrote the revelation of Jesus Christ in the 90s, maybe even as late as 100. You know, those years really don't make any difference. 3rd John is the shortest book in the New Testament. It's another letter that John wrote, just like 1 and 2. We don't know exactly to whom it was written. Doesn't seem to be written to a specific church, although this one is written to specific people. So I can't help but think that if he's written to these specific people, which we'll get into, or one in particular, Gaius, if he wrote specifically to Gaius, you would think that he's writing to a church, at least to a leader in the church. Well, 3 John is written from a pastor whose leadership and authority have been rejected, which we will see as we go through 3 John. And so John now appeals to another leader. He appeals to Gaius. And he seems to have meant to encourage Gaius. And Gaius was perhaps a pastor under John's oversight. I say perhaps. It's another one of those things we don't really know. And the epistle gives mostly positive counsel, but it also warns against a power-hungry leader named Diotrephes. And we've all heard and talked about Diotrephes a lot. Truth, love, and the goodness of God are the predominant themes in this epistle. Now, as I said, this epistle revolves around 3 individuals. Gaius, who is the recipient of the letter, Diotrephes, the one who's causing the trouble, and Demetrius, who may have been the bearer of the letter. Several commentaries believe that he was. The purpose of the letter was to give a word of exhortation to Gaius and to encourage him not to imitate the bad example that Diotrephes has laid out. Instead, Gaius was to continue the good work that he was already doing, and in specifically in receiving and supporting the traveling preachers or missionaries, because this seems to be one of the things that Diotrephes has a big problem with: traveling ministers coming in, particularly, when you get right down to it, he didn't want an apostle of Jesus Christ. He did not want him to, hang on, I've got, okay, I got this from Wade. His dad's using Nina's iPad and isn't using the microphone. Wade says Nina is doing good, and he couldn't get his GoToMeeting to work today. So that's Wade. So okay, thanks, Wade. So John has written this letter to Gaius, and he's telling him that he's doing a good work and to keep receiving and supporting traveling preachers or missionaries, because as we know, I mean, what was Paul if he wasn't a traveling missionary? I mean, that's exactly what he was. Now, Gaius was called beloved 4 times in this short letter, and in the King James version, he's called beloved 3 times, and he's called well beloved once. And I can't help but think, if I'm writing a letter, or let's say a strong Christian is writing a letter to another Christian in today's environment, I don't think we would be saying beloved and most beloved and well beloved and those things. That way of talking with each other seems to have gone by the wayside. I as you well know, Rod was my buddy. I wouldn't call Rod beloved, although he was beloved, but that's just not a way that we talk to each other today. Gaius trusted in Christ and was a close friend of John's, and John knew he could depend on him as a leader of the church. And Diotrephes was the opposite. He was a leader in the church. And here's where we don't know if this was a specific location church or in the area, and I can't help but think it was both. But he was a bad leader. He was a terrible leader. And I'm going to go over some attributes that aren't specific. Some of them are not specifically written in the letter, but I think they're implied. One, he wanted to be, I'll catch up in a minute. He wanted to be preeminent. He wanted to be the top dog. He wanted to be the head honcho. He didn't want anybody to question him. He wanted the people to come to him for advice and counsel. He wanted the people to seek his opinion first. As I said, some of these are implied. They're not specifically called out. He wanted to have the major say, not a major say, but the major say in all decisions. And that's decisions on who was allowed to come and speak to the people in the church. He wanted the right to approve or disapprove who did what. And he wanted the authority to remove anyone who disagreed with him. You all have probably all run across people like this in the hierarchical system that many of us have come out of. I've seen these people. You all have probably seen these people where maybe, all of these don't fit them, but a bunch of them do, and more than these. Well, I was listening to an old sermon of Ron Dart's, which shouldn't be a big surprise to any of you all. And he was speaking about church government. And we've all heard that term and talked about it, I guess, ad nauseum. I mean, we grew up with it in the church, and we struggled, many of us, to get away from it. But Ron made a comment that what church government actually is politics. And, I got to thinking about that, and I said, well, I guess that's right. I guess it is political. Have you, any of you ever thought of it that way, that church government is just a big political system?
Do we really want to go there?
Michael, I got to tell you this. Diane said, what do you think about today? And I said, well, there's not going to be a lot of area of discussion. It's this one's just a little bit different until I mention the word church government. And here we go. Yeah, we can go there for a little bit, because that's what seems to be going on in a microcosm. Isn't that what's going on here with the people that John has written the letter to? It's a political system, politics, church government, top down. So, Michael, do you want to throw something in?
Oh, no, just other than the fact that that's not what Jesus wanted us to do, the top-down thing.
No.
And there's bad results of that, which, many of us, I know I have, Erica has, we've experienced. And it hasn't been helpful. It's actually, in some regards, stunted either our growth or ran our children completely out of the faith, or out of the church at least. So, we've talked about it quite a bit. So, yeah, the top-down stuff I'm not a fan of. And I don't like politics, especially within the church. I've seen a lot of it. Even working with you, Skip, at the feast, you and I have both seen how politics interferes with the ability of people at the local level that are putting something together. It hinders in more ways than it helps, at least in my estimation.
Yeah. So I just had one little short paragraph about this, and I was asking a redundant question. Have you ever heard the statement that God's government is from the top down? Yeah.
Yep.
Or should I ask, how many times have you heard that statement?
Entire sermons for weeks on end.
Yeah. In other words, there's a hierarchy of leadership from God down to the lowest, to the brand new member of the church, at least according to those in charge. Now, logically, though, if you think about it, it makes some sense. Somebody needs to be, I hate to use the term in charge, but somebody needs to be in a position to make a final decision if there's a question about things. We know Moses set up a system of leadership suggested by Jethro, his father-in-law, which seemed to work. So we must continue that top-down government, or the church will just be in chaos. I mean, that's what we've heard.
Wait, let's look at that example real quick, though.
All right.
If my understanding is correct, most of the issues, the people brought issues or conflicts or problems up the chain. It didn't come from the top down. It went from the bottom up. And they had to get it solved at the local level, and then the higher level, and then it would go to Moses when the lower levels couldn't make a decision. It wasn't the top issuing edicts and issuing this unless it came from God himself. At least that's my understanding, and you can tell me if I'm wrong on that.
Michael?
That's a good point.
I think one of the things we need to realize about Moses is that the government that Moses had, and there was obviously some top-down stuff. It was, who went first when the Israelites moved? Which tribe went first? Which one was on the east? Which one was on the west? All of that stuff. I mean, there was clearly some top-down government, but that top-down government ceased once Israel entered the Promised Land, and the only government was church and some local tribal stuff, if somebody murders or something like that. But there wasn't any top-down government once Israel got to the land. And I think that in the past, worldwide is the classic example, modeled after the government, if you will, of Moses in the wilderness, not after the government that got established when Israel took over the land of Canaan.
Yeah, if you remember, there was a point where the people were murmuring, they were all mad, and Moses was catching flack from everybody. And he went to God and he said, "Why have you done this to me? Why am I catching all this flack from all of these people? Can't you do something?" And God came up with a different system. I say came up with it, he knew he was going to do it all along. But he appointed 70 elders. Yeah. Somebody going to say something?
Is that system the 70, the Sanhedrin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you notice, and I don't know that this makes a whole lot of difference, but it's interesting. There were 12 tribes, and there were 70 elders. You can't divide 12 into 70. So you didn't have an elder over each tribe. You had 70 elders. And that's the way that God governed for quite some time. So those of us, yeah.
I apologize, first of all, for leaving my mic on a while ago.
Oh, it's
But
okay.
such is life. I think that the whole thing about government has to do with the heart. And clearly, the issue with Israel was that they did not have a heart in them to obey God. In the same way, Michael last week very aptly showed that the nation of men, even with high expectations and high hopes that was set up in 1776 was not able to function appropriately unless there was a heart in the people who were part of the United States to submit themselves to God first. So I think that this point is made very clearly in the lessons of Israel and the lessons all down through history, that unless people have a heart in them to follow and obey God and to be submissive to moral and righteous thinking, that whatever happens is going to fail. Because there is not a letter that can make people love to do the right thing. Done.
Yeah, and there is a scripture that and I'm sure you all, I don't know, you may talked about it last week and I can't quote it exactly, but you know, where God says, "Oh, that these people would have a heart in them to do as I want them to do." I'm quoting it, you know, very badly, but yeah, exactly what you said. If your heart's not in it, you know, and one of the examples, and maybe it's not a good example, but I think our little group of 20 or 30 people is a really good example of how a church, because I consider us a church, I think you all, I hope you do, how a church can operate with no one in charge. We don't have anybody in charge. Oh, you all ask me to do a PowerPoint every week, but you know, I'm not in charge. I can't tell you all to do anything. Don't want to tell you all to do anything. And you all don't want to tell anybody. We all talk about what we want to do. If sometimes I come to you all and say, "Hey, I've got a problem. Can you know, blah blah blah." But I think this little group is a perfect example of the way things ought to run. Now,
Well, we're kind of a confederation rather than I guess the classic word church, because you know the argument that I've read and I've heard from people that are still into the corporate, you know, hierarchy system is that people with a heart to follow God then will join themselves to the godly authority. The problem the issue that always comes up is then that power then interferes with you being led individually by God. You know, and we were a republic, or we were made a republic in this country since Mark brought up my study last week. The reason we were a republic is we were to be self-governed. That means we would have a minimal central governing authority to basically deal with the important stuff. But that individually, as long as we were obedient as a culture to God, then we could be led in which way God was going to lead us to do things individually, as long as it didn't cause division and things like that. Yeah, whoever was speaking, go ahead. Art, did you have a comment?
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Okay, my screen's gone blank. Ecclesia is the word that we use for congregation or assembly. Sure. And a church typically is symbolized by a building. The only way that we can come together is by having due respect for the fact that people view things differently and see things differently and understand things differently. And in a typical organizational structure, that is really not allowed. The doctrines are stated in 403B Corporation, and the fragmentation of Worldwide Church of God has spawned over 400 different groups. So what we are doing is wonderful and it's unique. Thank you very much, everyone, for the contributions. It's a wonderful time on the Sabbath. Now, I don't know what's happened to my screen, so I'm going to log out and log back in again, okay?
Okay.
Mayor. Hey, real quick then, Skip, since we're on the subject of government and church government, Jill brought up a real interesting point last week during our presentation, and I think it applies specifically. What it does apply specifically to the ecclesia to church groups and stuff, is that she noted that one of the things that churches always end up doing to themselves is when they get together. She made a note that a lot of the groups will issue what they call a statement of beliefs. And her point was, once they do that and they put pen to paper, she said that then they're locked in and there can't be any deviation or change, or God can't lead them to a different understanding without causing a lot of issues. And that we kind of box ourselves into a problem when we do. In a way, we kind of become exclusionary. Here's our statement of beliefs, and there's no deviations allowed. And if you want to be part of our group, then you have to agree to these statement of beliefs. And that's like, maybe that's where a lot of groups kind of sort of get themselves down the path of top-down governing. So I just thought it was an interesting observation that she made last week. I thought I'd bring it up again.
It sounded like she was absolutely right on. Those of us who've been involved in the Church of God for years have seen how corrupt such a system has become.
Let me add to that.
Yeah.
In the early, what year was that? 2001 or so, we were in the process of moving from Waco to Austin. And in Waco, Jill and I were part of a congregation that was it was a follow off from a group of people who had met together. And so we met together and we did not have any kind of statement of belief. Now, when we moved to Austin, eventually, we became part of a congregation, or were part of starting up a congregation. And we had, similar numbers of people like we have here in this virtual congregation. And we set up a website and decided that we would not have a list of doctrinal beliefs. And our motto on the front was, on the first page was, following God's instruction. I can't remember exactly. It was a scripture in Proverbs, I believe, to follow the word of God. And for this very reason that Jill mentioned last week, was that how do you ever deal with situations? If you lock it in, then you have to defend it, and you have to make sure that it's right. And by the way, who's ever been wrong? Your opinion is always right.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
So we tried to maintain that without having large variations of whatever, dissent or that and that sort of thing. Now, to be honest with you, and this is something I discovered in the mid-90s, and I thought about it and gave a Bible study on it down at College Station one time, about the fact that none of us really had a total agreement on everything we believed. I said, for example, how many of you and this is just a little home Bible study. I said, how many of you sitting there out there, in the living room here, how many of you believe that the millennium is going to be a place where everybody sits underneath their fig tree and they're all going to have their garden and a piece of land, and we're going to raise crops and we're going to do things rustically and very simply and all that sort of thing? So a number of hands went up, and I said, okay, so how many people in this living room believe that, when Christ comes back, millennium is going to set up, we're going to have computers, cars, so on and so forth, and technology is going to be righteously advanced and that sort of thing? And another set of people raised their hands. And you should have seen the looks at each other from those groups, from that one simple illustration about how could you believe that? So my point is that there wasn't anger or anything like that. But my point is that in this group that we have right now, logged on, a lot of us have different beliefs about a lot of things. But as Michael brought up and Skip's brought up, we can get along because we know that, I think we know that the real point is that we worship God and his son, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Good point.
Exactly. And we don't need a set of doctrines. I've said this for a long time and I didn't coin the phrase. Doctrines divide. You start writing down doctrines and you're eventually going to be losing people. And I don't know if you all lost anyone, Mark, hopefully they got your point. But, when you start writing down these unbreakable doctrines, you're going to start losing people. So anyway,
Can I say something?
Sure. Sure.
Still kind of driving. Just now we're in the neighborhood, so be all right. I think doctrines are okay if you have them for what they are supposed to be, which is kind of a cultural. How do we observe these laws for our culture and our time, which should kind of change with our culture in some ways, and I think there should be some back and forth, some dialoguing about how those things should be observed. The problem is you get people who just hold on to a tradition or a doctrine, kind of conflating both of those, and then they don't move. They just stay stagnant and static. And and again, I think it's also this kind of confusing of ecclesia, the word church. This idea of is it a building? Is it a set of doctrinal distinctives or a statement of beliefs? I think that it's okay. I think you get these people who then use those laws, right? We can call them laws because that's how people relate to them, and then they use them to beat people upside the head, disfellowship and all this and the other, and they become toxic. But and that's also, again, a matter of the heart. I think it would be also interesting to point out that Moses did not want to be in power, right? He was like caught killing the Hebrew and fled and kind of became domesticated by marrying a wife, and God started to work with him, and he was still kind of ambivalent. And I think the best leaders, for that matter, are the ones that don't necessarily have. They're just. I think that they serve out of a sense of duty and obligation, not out of a sense of wanting to be regarded. But anyways, that's what I have to share about it.
Yeah. Arthur is back. Arthur, were you finished with what you were saying?
Skip,
Yeah.
our group in Kansas City, we've been together about, 26 years. And probably about, 15 years ago, we decided we were going to try to put together something with our beliefs and all like that. And we decided we would just put together something just very, very basic and not get into the details and all like that to not drive people away, because we knew we had a lot of different beliefs, but we tried to make something very basic. And we knew we had people that did not believe in the holy days. We had other people that did. So we were going to try to make it very basic, even that, and not split the group up. So we started out making it very, very basic. And we found out after about the second meeting, this isn't going to work. And after the second meeting, we dropped it very, very quickly and said there's no reason for us to split our group up, and have never gone back to even touch it.
Yeah, and you all have been one of the strongest congregations. I go back a long way, and I've always thought Kansas City group as being one of the most vibrant, solid congregations that there is. And I'm glad you stopped with that, because those, that does divide us. You can't, let's see, how do I phrase this? You can't lightly say we believe in observing the holy days when you got people sitting there who don't believe in observing the holy days. But here's something that I have learned to do, and I'm not bragging. This is a fact. I can abide differences and can attend services with people who don't believe the same way I do. And I'm talking about some major stuff: heaven and hell, Sabbath, holy days, rapture, all of those things. I'm okay with, worshiping with those people, but there are a lot of people that cannot abide the differences. They just can't do it. If you don't agree with everything that I believe, I'll give you one or two, but I'm not giving you, I'm not going to sit here and worship with you on Wednesday morning if you keep insisting that you're not going to observe the Sabbath. And I think that is a big key. And I do think that this group is very good at abiding differences. We don't bite anybody's head off when they come up with something completely different from what I may believe. Was somebody going to say something?
Well, Art had his mic on a minute ago, but he might have just been testing the waters. I'm trying to help you get back on to where you're at here with your notes on the screen. What's interesting, and I guess I close out this particular aspect of the topic as far as statements of beliefs and things, and is that last bullet point you have where he wanted the authority to remove anyone who disagreed with him. And that tends to be the general function of when we start putting out, here's our statement of principles or our statement of beliefs. It functions as a way that if you want to fellowship with us, then you have to agree to these minimal understandings, and then we therefore then reserve the right to remove you if you don't agree with us on these issues. And I saw that happen in the West Tennessee group. And so that, again, we when you get into a situation where you have people that John's addressing here, that people that want to be preeminent, that want everyone to go to them for advice, that they want to be the head and they want to be in control. And sadly, I mean, there's a lot of people I know that went to the colleges that our culture used to have, and this is what they were instructed to have as a mindset. And I noticed that there's a lot of people I know that have what John's listing here. So again, there's nothing new under the sun, and so we can all understand what John's dealing with when he's writing this letter. And hopefully, I brought the study back to where you were going with this, Skip.
Yeah.
Here's your segment.
Yeah. Okay. I could say more, but I'm not going to. I'm going to go on. Thank you, Michael. Those of us who have been involved with the Church of God over the years have seen how corrupt such a system can become or has become. As with most man-made structures, corruption is going to eventually creep in. I don't care if it's a bank or a college or a church. There's going to be some misbehaving. Okay. Yeah. It's almost automatic that a hierarchical system occurs in churches. Just almost automatic. I don't know of one. And I'm talking about large churches. I'm talking about the corporate guys that we all know about. It can be the same in a local congregation. Who's in charge? And those who get closest to the one or the ones that are in charge ultimately have more influence. We call that politics.
I think you touched on something that's made the big reason why a format like this that we have works and helps us to help each other learn and takes all the briars out of or stumbling blocks is because we don't have to worry about buildings and committees. You don't have to, oh, well, we're going to wear shorts and ties or skirts, or the music has to be, with no musical country, no instruments, and all these things that have cultural variances that aren't scriptural. And I think in a lot of the writings we see, especially in Galatians and some of the things that John have, they were addressing a clash of cultures. The Greeks, the Jews, all these different things that you didn't drop when you found believed in Yeshua Messiah, they didn't all of a sudden leave all their traditions and their cultures at the door.
Yeah. Yeah, and you allow people to be different. And that's something that we all need to learn. We need to learn to allow people to have a different belief. Mark and I have had numerous discussions, and every once in a while something will come up that he and I don't agree on. We don't argue about it. He states his opinion, I state my opinion, we go on. It's that way with the group that I go to Bible study on Wednesday mornings with. But anyway, okay, let me go on. Okay, so now this is going to sound a little crazy at first. Hopefully, I can explain what I'm trying to say. But with that said about the hierarchical situation and that corruption can creep in and so on. With that said, who has caused the most trouble in the Church of God as we know it over the years? Well,
The leadership.
Yes. What was that, Arthur?
The leadership.
Well, now you have jumped all the way to the end of where I was going with this.
Sorry.
Exactly. The natural, answer most Christians would say, well, Satan. But has he? And one thing Ron said in this sermon I was listening to, he said, we certainly he is the author of evil, but have the things that he has done really worked for him? He caused the Son of Man to be killed. While we don't like talking about it and we kind of look down our noses at the people that did it, who here is not glad that Jesus, the Christ, died and shed his blood? I mean, really, who has a problem with that? Nobody, because we're bound for Gehenna fire if that doesn't happen. So it didn't create the desired effect that Satan wanted, which I think proves that Satan still doesn't understand everything. Because, if he had known that, he would have done everything that he could to keep it from happening. What about the persecution of the churches in Judea and in the Middle East? Did that stamp out the church? No. It caused the church to grow. And we can go on and on with things like that. I'm not saying Satan doesn't cause trouble. Don't take me wrong. But it's almost like, there have been unintended consequences to his actions. And we may not see it when it first happens. For instance, if you had been an early Christian, you had been a follower of Jesus Christ, and you had watched him get hung up on a board, nailed to it, and watched the blood come pouring out of him, you didn't see the good that was going to come out of that. There's no way. I know I wouldn't have. But eventually, God will cause good to come out of it. So who or what has done the most damage to the Church of God for the past 2,000 years? Arthur hit on a big, major part of it, and that's the leadership. One of the things that I remember, and Ron even mentioned it in his sermon. He said the old pogo strip where he said, "We've met the enemy, and he is us." And there's so much truth to that. I think a general in the Army said something similar to that, and the pogo riders took advantage. So let's talk about one of these times. And we find it in the third epistle that the Apostle John wrote. Trouble came from inside. Paul warned us about that. Peter warned us about that. The Apostle John warned us about that. The trouble is going to come from inside. I didn't know if somebody was going to say something. All right, so let's go. Let's do something kind of weird. Let's actually look at 3 John. Look at the scriptures. So John writes this letter to the beloved Gaius. We don't know where Gaius was. We can assume that he was in the Asia Minor western part, where the 7 churches were. He was in that area. He says, the elder, which is John, to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. And he calls him beloved 4 different times. Once in the King James, it says well beloved or something like that. But he calls him beloved 4 different times. Beloved, I pray that in all respects you may prosper. Okay, sure. And be in good health, just as your soul prospers. For I was very glad when brethren came and testified to your truth. So John either knows Gaius, and these people have come to reinforce the good things that he's heard of, that he knows of him. But either way you go, he was glad when brethren came and testified to Gaius's truth, and that he doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk. I'm sorry, folks, I can't put myself on mute to keep you from hearing that. Although Diane would probably like for me to put myself on mute sometimes. He says, I have no greater joy than this, to hear of my children walking in the truth. John was overjoyed when he heard other Christians talking about what a great man Gaius was. And then he calls him beloved again in verse 5. You're acting faithfully in everything you accomplish for the brethren. Everything you do faithfully. And especially when they are strangers. Now, the whole point, not the whole point, but a big point of this is that we have traveling ministers, men and women, ordained and not ordained, elders and non-elders. They are traveling to different church groups, speaking to them, teaching them about the Christ, teaching them about the gospel. But Diotrephes doesn't want any part of it. He doesn't want them there, because they might say something that's going to take away some of those things in that list that we had a while ago. He says, and they have testified to your love. He's talking about people who've traveled around, and they've testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. Now, what he's saying there is, don't just say, what was it Spock said, live well and prosper or something like that. And they come, they teach, and you just say, okay, go. You've been here 3 days. You're starting to smell like fish, as the proverb, I think, says. It's time for you to leave. No, that's not the way they treated them. when they left with stuff. Now, not a lot of stuff, not a huge salary, but he says, you are acting faithfully in whatever you accomplish for the brethren, especially when they're strangers, and they've testified to your love before the church. And here's where he says, you will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. Well, what's a manner worthy of God? Go your way and prosper? Or here's some fruit. Here's a tent. Here's a couple of bucks. You know, however it was that they sent them on their way when they voluntarily wanted to leave, they sent them in a manner worthy of God. For they went out for the sake of the name of Christ, the name of the Father, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Now that one, I don't exactly understand why John added that. You know, it says what it says. I'm not going to argue with it, but it seems that the people who gave a little bit to these traveling missionaries were Israelites. So anyway, anybody got a thought on that? Accepting nothing from the Gentiles? I don't really follow that, except that he said accepting nothing from the synagogues. Okay, now looking back on the way the work was done in the early church, we see 2 or 3 men, sometimes women, who would be sent out by a local church to spread the gospel. I mean, that's what's going on here. And here we're at the end of the first century. You know, things are about to change, as we well know what started to change after John died. And here we've got this guy Diotrephes who's already causing trouble. But they're sent out by a local church. They weren't sent out with bags of money. Most of the time, they weren't sent with much of anything. They were totally dependent on the brethren that they met and lodged with along the way. They stayed in their homes. We've seen several scriptures about that, about how, what's the word I'm looking for? Hospitality. That word has been used several times. I know Paul used it several times. Hospitality is where you take someone into your home and you treat them well and you feed them. And when they leave, you help them with a little bit of something. You know, we know that Paul would often get up early in the morning, go to work, make a few tents, sell them, and live off the money that he made when he sold the tents. And he would preach when he could. And often these people that were traveling, they would depend on local brethren to give them help. I've already said that. And this is the case with this man, Gaius. John writes Gaius and says, hey, Gaius, I'm coming your way. I know I can depend on your help. And he says in 3 John, he says, you act faithfully with the brethren, especially when they're strangers. And when they leave, you send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. They don't leave Gaius's home empty-handed, especially accepting nothing from the Gentile brethren, as it says down there, whatever that means.
Well, does it say Gentile brethren, or is it just Gentiles, period, in terms of like the nations?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, you're right. It doesn't say Gentile brethren.
Well, you asked earlier what that might mean, and it's one of the things that hits me in the context of everything that you've got up on the screen here, verse 1 through 7 of 3 John, is it possible that there was an issue where there was some doubt among the brethren. Like, listen, we're in these pagan areas where Roman domination, and we're going to need help from the locals in order to do what we're doing, because the synagogues are small, sparse, and limited. Yeah, Barb says, NIV says pagans. And you're dealing with, and you went through this in many of your previous studies with Paul, Skip, that these areas were, these were pagan areas, Roman dominated. Is it possible that there was maybe some doubt as to whether these missionaries could go out without accepting support and help from Gentiles, and that might cause them to compromise some things in order to gain monetary help or supply help? Just a thought. I don't know for sure, it doesn't say, but it's an interesting thought about that, in terms of maybe that was something he was nipping in the bud right away. Put your faith and trust in God and what you've given them on the name, and you don't have to accept charity or help from people outside the faith.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially, where Barb said pagans in the NIV, not accepting them from people who hate the very idea of Christ. That's a good point. Now, in verse 8, he says, this is the way we should treat traveling ministers. We should help them spread the gospel. I don't know if I've got verse 8 there. I've got verse 9. I don't have verse 8. We should help them spread the gospel. But in verse 9, he writes of a problem. Here we go. I wrote something to the church. Now, this is where I kind of go, is this a letter that is for the area? Or is he talking about a specific congregation? Doesn't tell us. Doesn't really matter, but it doesn't really tell us. But he wrote something to the church, and we know that's the called out ones. But Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. So John has written 2 letters. One of them we don't see. One of them he wrote to Diotrephes, or he wrote it to the church, and it got to Diotrephes. And then he wrote one to Gaius. And he tells Gaius, which is what this one is, I wrote that jerk, Diotrephes, but he's not going to help. He doesn't even want us to come to town. And he's not going to let us come to church services. I'm kind of reading a little bit into that. He told Diotrephes that he and others were coming their way, and presumably said, we're going to need, or they're going to need, a place to stay and a little food. And Diotrephes says, no, you're not getting anything. Apparently, this is the same church where Gaius was, or the same area where Gaius was. But it seems that Diotrephes was the man in charge. Now, maybe he had put himself in charge, but here we've got a political situation. He's the head of the local hierarchy, because Diotrephes couldn't do this by himself, could he? He had to have people supporting him. He had to have the thugs, if you will. And they ran people off that didn't agree with what Diotrephes had to say. Yeah.
What we're looking at here in Diotrephes is a personality type. Basically, there's 4 personality types. And Diotrephes, to me, seems to be a choleric, irritable, bad-tempered, domineering type of personality. Now, I don't know if he had all of those characteristics, but clearly that's very different from people who are sanguine or optimistic or phlegmatic and unemotional and calm, or melancholy, which is a sort of negative feelings of sadness with no particular cause. And you'll always find in groups, whether it's in the military, whether it's in a church, etc., in an organization. Those who are of a choleric nature and a controlling nature. And the very beauty about what's taking place now is that while there may be someone who fits one of those four categories, but nobody is doing that. We are very patient and very kind and very sharing, and it's a wonderful example of how things should be. But in the early New Testament here with John's writing, it's very, very clear. As they went around to different places, they came across people who were controlling and then co-opted the message and started their own thing.
Yeah, I think you definitely described Diotrephes or whoever the guy is. He was a jerk. You know, he had to be in charge. He you know, everybody had to listen to him. He was hard to get along with, and you know, we've all probably seen leaders like that. I can name a couple that were leaders of church groups that I was in. And you know, they're certainly not delegators. Certainly not delegators. Now, I want to go back to verse 9 because, no, I don't have to go back to it. It's still there. John says, I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. The Greek here for what we say is ego, and I don't think that's where we get our word ego, but it means I. In other words, John is telling Gaius that he wrote Diotrephes, but he won't accept the traveling ministers, which would include John. And in 3 John verse 10, he says, for this reason. For what reason? Because Diotrephes is such a jerk. For this reason, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does. If anybody will listen to me, I mean, after all, I am an apostle of Jesus Christ. And by the way, Jesus' mother's living with me. You know, we don't know that for sure, but, you know, I'm going to call attention to his deeds because he's unjustly accusing us with wicked words. And he's not satisfied with this. That's not it. He himself won't let any of the brethren speak or attend his church, wherever that is. Either, and he forbids those who desire to do so. He forbids people who want to listen to people we have sent, and he puts them out of the church. I know that sounds familiar to many of us here. This is unbelievable. One of Christ's own apostles, one of the 12, had sent a letter to a church leader, signed it, and this man accuses him of being greedy, being out for himself, being, you name the different things that Diotrephes could have said. And he goes so far as to kick people out of the church for offering help. And he might have even kicked Gaius out. You know, we don't know. It's pretty obvious that Gaius and Diotrephes don't get along very well. So John tells Gaius that he will address this evil that Diotrephes has done, or Diotrephes, however you pronounce it, and is no longer the man to lead this group or this congregation or this ecclesia. Gaius is. Gaius is the man that John is going to put in charge of this area, let's just call it this area, because we just don't know. And in verse 11 and 12, he calls Gaius beloved again. He says, don't imitate what's evil. Don't be like this guy. Be good. The one who does good is of God. The one who does evil has not seen God. And then a new name pops in. Demetrius. Demetrius has received good testimony from everyone. Now, didn't he say that one of the things that he really liked about Gaius is that he heard good things from other people about him? Well, here we have another man, Demetrius, who has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. In other words, he's teaching the truth. And we add our testimony. I'm telling you, Demetrius is a good guy. And you know that our testimony is good or is true.
Do you suppose Demetrius was the one that delivered the letter?
That's what a lot of the commentaries say. Yes, Jim, that he did deliver the letter, and this would be his intro, wouldn't it, to Gaius? You know, I'm sending this letter via Demetrius, who's received good testimony from everybody, and by the way, mine too. So yeah, I think that's very, very possible. And that's what a lot of commentaries say. So Gaius, I'm going to say something in a minute that hurts me to say. So Gaius is to gather together all the people who trust John and who serves John and other traveling missionaries, as he should. And he and his group support and care for the traveling ministers. And this is one of the early church splits. That's the part I meant that it hurt me to say it. It really hurts me to say that 60 years after Jesus Christ died and was resurrected, we're already having church splits. Now, this is probably not the first one, but, you know, it hurts to read that, you know, this is obviously a church split. Now, was Diotrephes all alone in putting people out of the church? No. He has a following. He has a small hierarchical system that we call politics. People schmoozing with the boss. And, you know, I learned early on, if I say what the boss wants me to say, then I'm talking about in the church, this is what I found, then I can be on in the in crowd. So we see at least three characteristics of wrong actions in 3 John. One, desire for prominence and recognition. We see all of these in Diotrephes, by the way. A desire for prominence and recognition. You know, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be recognized for a job well done. Gaius had a good reputation from both within and without. But Diotrephes only wanted prominence and recognition so he could be the man. Desire to maintain control, no matter what. I'm in charge. Anybody that disagrees with me, throw them out of the church, throw them out of the Ecclesia, throw them out of the building. The men who were coming with a letter from John saying Demetrius was a good man and that the people should listen to him were a threat to Diotrephes and his minions. They were not to be accepted into the group. He wouldn't let others in the congregation associate with true ministers and would go so far as to disfellowship them in order to maintain control of the church. And he's not disfellowshipping people causing trouble. He's the one that's causing trouble. and he's disfellowshipping the people who are trying to straighten the problem out. And then we have malice toward existing leadership in the church. Diotrephes, I hate to use the word hated, but I'm going to. He probably hated John and the people that John was sending, unjustly accusing them with wicked words, is what it says up in 3 John, refusing to meet with them. Can you imagine refusing to meet with an apostle of Jesus Christ? No way. I'm not going to meet with him. I don't care who he is.
Well, how many times have we seen that ourselves within, in churches or our former corporate associations, where we're not going to meet with this pastor or this minister because he's not from our group, and they always accuse you. This is what they always revert to. Well, they're preaching false doctrine, meaning that they're not in 100% lockstep with what we say the doctrines are, which means that you have to agree with the man in charge, the head apostle, the chief, president or whatever it is of a group. And that's just something that, even though John's writing about it, and it's 60 years after Christ that this is happening, and it's been going on ever since. Nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new under the sun. You're exactly right.
Yeah, can I make a comment, please, Skip?
Sure.
It's very interesting to go through this because at that time they had no Bible. They probably didn't have the Torah or the Old Testament. They simply only had word of mouth. And we use the word apostle, but actually the original word might be better translated as a messenger. So messengers came through with information to these people who would listen, and Diotrephes got to be preeminent among this particular group. But they lost their way simply because of being controlled by Diotrephes. And it's very easy to understand how they would lose their way, simply because they didn't have the scriptures as we have today, which we can look at and read and draw conclusions from what took place. So from my studies of the early New Testament church in Asia Minor, is that very easily and very quickly they were swallowed up. And simply because of all of the things that I mentioned, like no Bible, word of mouth, small groups in homes, and eventually, people gather together because, to use the expression, misery loves company, so does happiness love company. But so this was a time when people were very vulnerable, and it shows very quickly how they could be turned away.
Yeah, that's a really good point. They're also most likely a great minority. And, I hadn't really thought about, I know it, but I hadn't thought about it in this case about, they were spreading everything by word of mouth. They didn't have what we have. You can meet somebody in a hotel, and there's a Gideon Bible there. Wherever you go, you can find a Bible if you don't have one with you. So yeah, good point, Arthur. So John wrote this epistle at the end of his life. He wasn't going to live very much longer. He was an old man. And it doesn't seem that he meant for it to be a warning, but it certainly becomes one. As he goes through this, but we hadn't listened to him. Not only did they not listen to him, we hadn't listened to him. I say we, you know what I mean? That's the collective we. And I want to go back and look at something that we've all enjoyed. Oh, yeah, Ken, good to see you. I've got a couple more scriptures, and I don't think either one of them are from John, 3 John. Here's what Paul wrote to Timothy as advice and as a warning about appointing elders. The elders who rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. And the scripture says, don't muzzle the ox while he's threshing. We all know what that means. Verse 20, those who continue in sin rebuke, and rebuke them in the presence of all, so that the rest also may be fearful of sinning. And he says, I solemnly charge you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus and of his chosen angels to maintain these principles without bias, doing nothing in a spirit of politics, doing nothing in a spirit of partiality. Rod's my buddy, so, I'm going to make him my second in command. But verse 22 is the one that I wanted to zero in on, and I think we all know this. And I think, I don't know how many of you all were early members of the Church of God International. I was, and I'm still very closely connected. Verse 22 is what happened in the Church of God International. Do not lay hands upon anyone too hastily, and thereby share responsibility for the sins of others. Keep yourself free from sin. I saw so many men ordained that had no business whatsoever being ordained. You all have probably seen some too. Those of you who were at the feast in 2019 probably remember me being ordained and may feel that way. Or Michael or John Beasley. But don't lay hands on anyone too hastily. And 5:17. And here's another one. This is another scripture from Paul to Titus. It says, for this reason I left you in Crete, that you would set in order what remains and appoint elders in every city as I directed you. Namely, and I want you to make sure that these men that you appoint are like this. If a man is above reproach, okay, so he doesn't sin all the time, he's got a good reputation and so on. The husband of one wife, and before anybody jumps on divorce, to me, that just means that he's only married to one woman. Anyway, having children who believe, not accused of dissipation or rebellion. For the overseer, bishop, someone, a minister that's over more than one church, must be above reproach as God's steward, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not addicted to wine, not pugnacious, not fond of sordid gain, but hospitable. There's that word I was talking about a while ago. Hospitable. Somebody comes to town, they don't have anywhere to stay, you can stay with us. Loving what is good, sensible, just, devout, self-controlled. Holding fast the faithful word which is in accordance with the teaching, so that he will be able both to exhort in sound doctrine and to refute those who contradict. It's one of the keys of a good teacher. Holding fast the faithful word, be able to teach, to exhort in sound doctrine, and to be able to refute those who contradict. Very important. For there are many rebellious men, empty talkers and deceivers, especially the Jewish ones, who must be silenced because they're upsetting whole families, teaching things they should not teach so they could get some money or gain something, get a cow, whatever. Now, after the qualification, and I didn't list there's like 3 or 4 different places where the qualifications are talked about. I just wanted to mention those. Here, after the qualifications are met, is, in my opinion, and now remember, after the qualifications are met, okay? In my opinion, this is the most important thing that must be done in order to determine who should be an elder. You ready for this? I think most of you are going to agree. Acts 6:2. So the 12 summoned the congregation of the disciples and said, it's not desirable for us to neglect the word of God in order to serve tables. You know, I don't want to get into all of this. A lot of people are incorrectly call these men deacons. They were diakonos. They were full-fledged ministers, but they had a different job than the disciples. But anyway, but verse 3 is the one I want to zero in. This is so important. And this hasn't happened in the Church of God until maybe in the last few years. Brethren. Who? Brethren. Who? You church members, all you people out there, select from among you 7 men of good reputation, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we may put in charge of this task. Well, he must have been confused, because what he should have said was, okay, you 3 guys over there that are in charge of this congregation, y'all pick out 7 people who, are going to be doing this. No, select from among you, and that hasn't been done. I've seen it myself, and I haven't been around as long as some of the rest of y'all have, but I saw it early on in the Church of God International, and I'm sure it was even worse in some of the other corporate groups. That the congregation didn't select the people who were already doing the job. It came from the top down. The men were chosen from the congregation. They were not appointed by the leaders. I suggest this was not done in the case of Diotrephes. That's it. I'm done. Comments? Corrections?
No corrections. I think that's that last point you made, I think, is an indictment of how some of us from the corporate world have had our negative experiences. Is that, everybody that was in politics in the church government was pretty much appointed either from headquarters or from someone that was sent from headquarters. And that's where, a lot of us have witnessed people that got involved in the politics, and the way we would put it from Chicago is they would brown nose and get their buddy with the leadership, so that they could get appointed into positions of leadership in order to lord over the rest of us. And I think in my own experience, those groups and congregations that have selected and chosen their own leaders, their own, laid hands on those that were from among them to do the work, are the ones that are blessed and are growing as far as congregations go, and they're very healthy. Again, my own personal experience, West Tennessee Sabbath is like that. They do not have a hierarchical system. There are no pastors there, and it's really interesting that when there are people that we know who are graduates of Ambassador and whatnot, that have continually lectured the elders of that congregation that they need to appoint a full-time pastor or several part-time pastors. And thankfully, they've resisted every effort that was pressured on them to do so. There's no need for that kind of leadership in that group, because everyone there has chosen who's going to be their elders and who's going to be in charge, and they all do their part and they work together. There's no need for a hierarchical system in that congregation, and it's very healthy and they're growing. And I think that's a real good example that I like to share when I go around and use them as an example of the way things should be as far as the way church government works. Now, again, it depends on the area. Imagine some areas they may need more top-down, as far as selecting people from within the congregation to be a little bit more, I don't want to say authoritarian, but, each area is going to have its own challenges, I think. So I don't want to blanket say that the way West Tennessee does it is the way everybody has to do it, but I've seen the success of what they've done and how they do it, and look at what we've done here. Skip brought this up at the beginning of the study. We don't have any appointed quote unquote rulers outside of Skip, because he kind of was the man that got all this started after he was asked to do so. I don't think Skip said, I'm going to get a following for myself, so I'm going to do this. He was asked, and there was a need, and he filled it, and he just got dumped into that position of being our fearless leader, whom we appreciate.
Well, thanks. All I have is a button where if you say something I don't like, I can kick you off. No, I'm a congregationalist. I believe that the congregation runs the show. But at the same time, there probably needs to be a committee or something that somebody has to make a final decision. But I am a congregationalist. This thing, that happened in Antioch when they appointed Stephen and Philip and those guys. Coordinator. That's a good point, John. Good point. A coordinator. The people looked around to see who was already doing the job and said, well, let's ordain him because he's already doing the job. Let's not ordain Charlie over here who just wants to do the job, but he hadn't lifted a finger in the last 3 years. Anyway, so.
Skip?
Yeah, Jim.
Besides people, the members of the church, so to speak, what do you have to do to have an ecclesia? There are only two things. You have to assign a time and a place. That's all the government that's needed. We are going to meet online at this time. That's about all the government we have here.
Yeah.
And I guess for that, you're pretty much dictator, and we accept it.
Well,
but beyond the time and place.
Yeah. It's funny about the time. The way we came up with the time was that we still had people, including me, who were attending church at UCG. And so we set our time where it didn't conflict with our ability to go. And then, eventually none of us were still going to church there. So we changed the time. We backed it up an hour. So, but even at that, the congregation basically set the time. But you're right; those are the only decisions really that you need to make. Yeah.
I was just going to say, since we're talking about local groups, I thought I'd tie a little bit of this to my presentation last week and where we've gone wrong as a nation. What we see work is when you have local groups selecting leaders from among them that they know have a good reputation, that could be counted on and are accountable on the local level. And in that way, that's why I use the term of confederation. When you get into a situation where you have top-down leadership from a corporate entity that exists on the other side of the country, starting to appoint your rulers, and people submit to that leadership, you get tyranny. And that's what we've seen both as a church culture, and that's what we're seeing right now happen to us as a nation. We have surrendered our local autonomy to state and federal authority, basically for money, and so that we could be absolved of the responsibility of tackling our own issues. And when you have that, then you're ripe for top-down authoritarianism. And again, our human nature is such, again, remember the ancient Israelites, they wanted to go back to Egypt. Being led around by the nose and being given pots of meat is something that I think is inherent in the human condition. And unfortunately, being slaves apparently is our lot, especially when you surrender it to top-down authority. And that's not what was intended for us as an ecclesia, or as a nation for that matter. Anyway, I just thought I'd bring up that parallel.
Okay.
Hi there, Arthur here. I put in my cell phone, what does church government mean? And it's very interesting because this is what we've been talking about really this morning. It's a noun, the administration and control of the affairs of the Christian church or a denomination of it. It's the system or form of polity, notice the word politics, upon which a particular Christian community is organized for the exercise of authority and discipline as the Episcopal, Presbyterian, Congregational, etc. So this is what church government is in today's terms, and I think we have all seen that to one degree or another. Just thought it was interesting what they would say on here.
Yeah, that is interesting. That is interesting. All right. Now, I sort of hesitate to even say this. As a matter of fact, I'm going to stop recording.
Hold on a second.
Yep.
Jill's got something.
Okay, Jill.
Well, was your thought going to kind of continue the conversation, or were we off on a different tangent?
No, I was going somewhere else completely, so I'd love for you to jump in.
Oh, okay. Because for a long time, I've read a lot and enjoyed kind of studying about personality types. And it's obvious that God creates people differently, with different gifts, different talents, but also with different personalities, different ways of looking at life and things around them. And you know, so when you talk about tyranny, you know, tyranny doesn't happen just because you have one person who wants to be in charge. And, you know, Michael pointed that out, that it requires people willing to cede their freedom or their own powers and give it over to somebody else. And that enables the tyranny to take place. Because you know, within a group of people, probably even as few as a dozen, you will have, you know, any of the major 4 different personality types emerging. And God created that so that, you know, you have the personalities that create art and music, and they're more emotional, they're not very practical, they don't plan ahead, they're not organized, but they can paint beautiful things, they can create beautiful music, they can do things that others of us just kind of stand back and go, wow. And, you know, and then when you have an event where you want to get a group of people together, whether it's a wedding or a conference or whatever, you get somebody, some kind of event planner, somebody who looks at life in an organized way and understands how, if you're going to get from point A to point B to point C and to the end of the event in a certain sequence, then you have to organize things a certain way and make it flow smoothly. And a good event planner can plan something to where you get from A to Z without really realizing that you've gone through all these little multiple steps along the way. And you go away from the event going, wow, that was really great. It was really organized. You turned around, there was coffee that was there, the food arrived at the right time, the microphone always worked, the chairs were set up, all those things. And everybody who was there just kind of goes, oh, wow, that was a great conference. And they often don't think about all the back work that went into it. And, you know, but then by the same token, if you're at the conference and you've got somebody who's got to speak and present things, we've probably all been in meetings or group activities and things where somebody gets up behind the microphone and starts talking, and then they don't know how to get from A to Z. You know, they've got a few points that they make, and they make them 16 different times, and they struggle to wrap the whole thing up, and you're sitting there feeling terribly uncomfortable for them and bored out of your brain, you know. And then you can have a speaker who gets up there, and in 10 minutes you're ready to get on board with that guy and go wherever, because he's so enthusiastic, he's so encouraging, he's so exhortational, you know, all those things. And so you see all the different personalities and how they can work together to accomplish really good and profitable things. And you think about back to our church, you know, culture, where we had deacons who had all the chairs set up and everything was, you know, I mean, you went in some congregations, there was duct tape on the carpet and everything was lined up and the chairs were perfect, and somebody stood there and they're walking down and just tweaking a chair just a little bit because it's, you know, 2 degrees out of whatever. And they get great satisfaction out of doing that and creating it that way. But then there's a whole bunch of people who wander into services, you know, and they just expect all the chairs to be set up. They come 5 minutes before everything starts, you know, and the coffee's brewed. They get their cup of coffee, they sit down. They often don't think about all the stuff that other people did. And so within everything, you know, we have people, it's easy for the people who are good at taking charge to do more than they should, because you have other people who are willing and enabling of that because they don't want to do it. They're lazy, or they don't want to get there on time, or they don't want to do the speaking, or they can't, or they know they can't do the speaking. And not all that group is not always indolent and lazy and whatever, because if everybody was a speaker, who would be in the audience to sit there and enjoy hearing the speech? If everybody was a speaker, the others would be sitting there just waiting for their turn and not really paying attention to the speaker, and sitting there thinking how much better maybe they could do it, or whatever it was. So we have all these different personalities that contribute to making a society and groups of people work together. And so the interesting thing is how well do we understand who we are, and how well do we understand people around us in such a way that we can utilize our personality type in such a way that it doesn't take advantage of others, but that it does but that it fulfills what we need to do. You know, because, and I know I'm one of these kind of people, I can go into a situation, and if it's not organized the way I would organize it, you know, I have to hold back from wanting to kind of tweak it and work it and get it around to where it's working properly, you know. And if I'm not in charge, I need to be able to just sit down and be quiet. But it's hard for me when I see something not functioning well, where it could be so much, in my mind, could be so much better if they just did this or that or the other, you know. And so you're always trying to balance those aspects of your personality that can be good and helpful, and not tread on other people. And in our church culture, lots of times we never even looked at those things when we gave people particular jobs. We looked at, you know, positions and jobs and whatever as somehow rewards, or, you know, spiritual ladder climbing or whatever it was. How many times did you sit in a congregation and have a song service where the guy leading songs was totally out of time and couldn't sing. But he was made the song leader because he, was good friends with the minister or whatever it was. He deserved it for something he'd done, and we create problems for ourselves when we don't acknowledge that people have, I don't really even think of them as gifts and talents. They kind of come along with it, but certain personalities do certain things better. And other people, and you need that mix and that combination. So it's a matter of how you put that together and how well aware each of us are as individuals as to how we can use our strengths, but not at the expense of other people. And, it's a lifelong kind of task that we're all given, but it does behoove us to know who we are and why we're that way, and understand why others are the way they are and have respect for it, rather than diminishing somebody else just because they're not like us. So there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into that, and you can take your Myers-Briggs test or whatever, but those are kind of, they work in a business world and whatever, but oftentimes people don't take those tests with the goal in mind of understanding themselves in relation to other people. They tend to take those tests thinking about what's the best job I can get that'll give me the most money. So there's a lot of those factors, and I think that's where that asking God to give you eyes to see who you are, and giving you a heart to see who others are, and where you fit in the whole pattern of things to make life go along more smoothly for everybody. So, sorry, I've waffled long enough.
That's good. Joe, you did a great job of describing the tightrope that exists for those of us in the church culture. On one side, you have what Ron Dart referred to as consumer Christians that are just there to get they don't care about who does all the jobs. They just, the chairs are set up, everything's done, and what are you going to do for me? And on the other side of the tightrope, you've got the control freaks, the ones that want to be in charge and want to lord over everyone. And so that's a good descriptor of kind of the environment that we sometimes have to operate in. So that was well done as far as describing that.
I think one of the other things, when we think about a good speaker, one of the and Jill is a classic example in her garden analogies to things. We communicate best about those things that we have a passion for, and even people who are not natural speakers, if they start talking about something they have a passion for, they become excellent speakers for that time. And, and that's amazing. And we need to let people that have particular, maybe just singularly focused talents, maybe we need to hear one sermon every 5 years from them, or or one discussion. The passion for the subject, if it's something you have passion about, for example, Michael would use Star Wars analogies, and I would use Star Trek. You have different passions for different things.
Amen. Yeah, I don't consider myself a good speaker at all. My wife gets irritated because a man's got to know his limitations, is what Clint Eastwood said in one of his movies, and I always agree. I agree with that. A man's got to know his limitations, and public speaking is not one of mine. And Spokesman's Club was something that was expected of you, so that's why I ended up going. But I wasn't like one of the main. I think I graduated there with like a D-. So I'm a better writer than a speaker, but I think you make a great point, Jim. When you're passionate about something, I think that your ability to convey your thoughts and ideas on it, it makes you a little bit better. Like last week, that's one of my prime passions as far as our nation, our foundation and our history. But when you don't have a passion for something, you're just talking by rote, not from the heart, then those are the ones that are the dry, boring. I'm reading, something from, I'm paraphrasing someone else's writings. There's something out of a booklet that I'm just rephrasing in my own words, and those tend to be boring. At least that's how I personally view it. But I would rather write than speak. But God always has other plans for me, it seems. But
Well, I mean, look at your classic example, or at least to me, and you are a good speaker. I mean, I enjoy listening when you speak.
well, thank you.
But despite all the things that you say that are obviously wrong,
Right.
but right, but the classic example for me is when you didn't want to be a minister, and you're in India with your daughter, and you do the lightsabers thing.
Oh yeah, that was fun.
I mean, and when you were doing that, you didn't. I'm quite sure that you didn't feel any inhibitions about being in a crowd of foreigners and preaching when you hadn't preached. It was something you had a passion for, and you had a passion for Christ, and you could put the two together. I mean, I hate to admit it, but Star Wars was a good example.
Yeah, Star Wars worked, and then that was we also challenged their cultural understanding because we were with a group of it was a Hindu orphans, and there were several hundred. I don't know how many, Erica, do you think were there that night? 200, 300, 400? These were kids that were there, and Rianne and I were trying to show them that you could take the sword of truth, which is what a lightsaber is, and you can defend yourself against the devil who's going to take the truth and he's going to twist it. So it's like what Jill does with her gardening allegories, but we did it in a skit using swords and lightsabers. And Rianne, I was the devil. I was dressed up like the emperor. And we went and had that battle, and she slays me. There's a woman with a sword that goes into it. We had a choreographed fight sequence, and she slays me, which was something that we challenged their culture, because they're a patriarchy and women are basically, not in such roles. But in using the example of the allegory as Prasad was translating, what we were doing is that anybody didn't have to be a man to wield the sword of truth. That women can do it also and slay. And so, yeah, if you have a passion for something and your audience, you can kind of convey your thoughts about anything and help them understand the truths of the way that we've been called to. I mean, look at Skip. I mean, he's from Arkansas, for crying out loud, but he has a speaking ability that's very conversational and not. He doesn't sound like your college lecturer. He's not a. I can't think of his name at the moment. We're not going to get a 5-hour lecture from Skip where it sounds like we're in a college classroom. He's going to be speaking in a very conversational way to help convey truths that are appealing. I mean, he's giving us the words from Scripture, but he's doing it in a conversational way that none of us feel that we're sitting either hearing a lecture or that he's got his teacher hat on. But it's almost like we're sitting around together on sofas and we're having a conversation, and he's simply leading the discussion. And that's one of the blessings that you have from someone like Skip, who's God's using his natural talents to be able to do these studies.
Well, thank you, sir. The way I picture everybody is all of you have gone to the couch, you're asleep, and you send each other texts every once in a while and say, ask a question. So that's kind of, that's how I picture.
Okay, gang, he's on to us.
Yeah.
How did he find out?
Yeah.
Well, Skip, With the help of us couch potatoes, I think you've done a good job today.
Well, thanks. I'm going to take it off record here for real quickly.